For decades, millions of devoted pop music fans worldwide remembered Andy Gibb as the exceptionally charming younger brother of the legendary Bee Gees, a bright young superstar whose meteoric career burned brilliantly before ending far too soon. Yet far behind the roaring crowd noise of sold-out concert arenas, the towering stack of chart-topping hit records, and the glossy magazine covers that dominated newsstands, there existed a deeply private family tragedy that very few people ever heard about. His daughter, Peta Weber, spent the vast majority of her life resolutely refusing to talk publicly about her famous father, actively avoiding media interviews, and keeping deeply painful childhood memories locked away to protect her sanity. Now, after enduring years of profound silence, she has finally opened up about the bittersweet reality of what it was genuinely like growing up as the daughter of Andy Gibb, revealing a deeply human side to a global icon. Her remarkable revelations paint a far more complex, emotional, and nuanced picture of the pop star than most passionate fans ever knew existed during the height of his fame. When everyday people think back on the incredible legacy of Andy Gibb, they usually picture the strikingly handsome young singer who effortlessly dominated international music charts alongside his famous brothers during one of the most commercially successful eras in pop history. Armed with timeless chart-dominating hit songs like I Just Want to Be Your Everything, Shadow Dancing, and Love is Thicker Than Water, Andy transformed into an unstoppable global sensation before he was even legally old enough to celebrate many of life's most significant personal milestones. Yet while millions of devoted followers eagerly tracked every single detail of his soaring professional career, there was one person who spent years desperately trying to sever any public connection to that intense fame: his own flesh and blood, Peta Weber. In exclusive interviews given much later in life, Peta candidly revealed that she never wanted to speak publicly about her father or capitalize on his massive celebrity status. According to information shared during the promotion of a family musical project, she actively avoided media attention for most of her life and rarely discussed her deep roots within the famous Gibb family dynasty. Unlike many children of major Hollywood celebrities who eagerly embraced their family legacy from an early age to boost their own profiles, Peta took the exact opposite path because she craved normalcy above all else. She profoundly preferred living a quiet, unassuming life in Australia, deeply desiring to be judged and known strictly for who she was as an independent individual, rather than for who her troubled father had been to the world. Part of that fierce reluctance came from the simple, heartbreaking fact that she barely knew the man who contributed to her DNA, as their time together was tragically brief. Andy and Peta's mother, Kim Reeder, initially married in Australia before making the momentous decision to move to the United States just as Andy's professional music career was beginning its explosive takeoff. At that crucial historical juncture, Andy had recently signed a lucrative contract with Robert Stigwood's legendary RSO record label and was tirelessly preparing for the massive breakthrough that would soon make him one of the most recognizable young stars on planet Earth. The future looked dazzlingly bright from the outside looking in, but domestic reality was unraveling behind closed doors. However, according to Peta's deeply personal account, the stressful reality unfolding inside the marriage was vastly different from the glamorous fairy tale portrayed in entertainment magazines and tabloid headlines. She explained that by the time her mother became pregnant with her, serious, irreconcilable problems had already begun to emerge within the household, threatening to destroy their foundation. Andy was increasingly surrounded by the suffocating pressures of sudden fame, relentless wild parties, and a growing, destructive reliance on illicit drug use that clouded his judgment. According to Peta's testimony, her mother eventually reached a breaking point and gave him a severe, life-altering ultimatum regarding his future. He was explicitly told that he needed to get completely clean, kick his dangerous habits, and focus intensely on his young family, or else she would pack her bags and leave forever. Tragically, Andy was unable or unwilling to make the necessary changes to save his home life, and the marriage ultimately collapsed under the heavy weight of addiction. Legal representatives quickly became heavily involved, aggressive media coverage closely followed every development, and the messy separation became public fodder. As Peta Weber continued to grow older in her quiet Australian environment, one of the strangest and most disorienting parts of her childhood was desperately trying to understand who her father actually was behind the glamorous facade. To the outside world, Andy Gibb was an untouchable superstar who lived a life of absolute luxury and adoration. He had topped the competitive Billboard charts multiple times, appeared on television variety programs on a regular basis, dated some of the most famous women in the entertainment industry, and seemed to be living an unending dream. But to young Peta, he was merely a distant voice echoing through a telephone receiver, someone who existed far away across the vast expanse of the ocean. In her later interviews, Peta explained that she spent a significant portion of her early childhood completely unaware of just how extraordinarily famous her father actually was in the broader world. Living a modest life in Australia with her mother, she enjoyed a relatively ordinary upbringing filled with local school days, neighborhood friends, and simple pleasures far removed from Hollywood. She knew intellectually that her father was a singer living in America, but that abstract information meant very little to a young child trying to make sense of an absent parent. One particular childhood memory stayed vividly etched in her mind for many years, serving as a bizarre bridge between two entirely different worlds she could not reconcile. She distinctly recalled her mother calling her into the living room one afternoon and pointing directly toward the television screen where a familiar face beamed back. On the broadcast was Andy, actively hosting and performing on the highly popular American music program Solid Gold, singing and dancing for millions. Peta remembered looking at the flashy, energetic performer on the screen and struggling deeply to connect that glittering television image with the quiet, distant man who occasionally dialed her phone number. Years later, she openly admitted how deeply confusing and unsettling that surreal experience truly was for a developing child. She simply could not mentally compute how the glamorous celebrity she watched singing on television was supposed to be the exact same flesh and blood person as her biological father. The vast, aching gap between Andy's dazzling public image and Peta's lonely private reality became even more difficult to navigate because of how fiercely other people treated her. While she wanted nothing more than to blend in and be treated like a completely normal child at school, her classmates and outside observers constantly reminded her that she was different. According to Peta, persistent media attention occasionally followed her and her mother around Australia, especially when sensationalist gossip magazines decided to publish wild stories about the troubled Gibb family. Instead of making her feel special or privileged, that unwanted public attention created acute social problems she never asked for or invited into her life. She later revealed with painful honesty that severe bullying became a regular, inescapable part of her school years as she tried to navigate her education. Other children frequently mocked and teased her mercilessly because of well-publicized reports detailing Andy's ongoing struggles with drug addiction and personal instability. Some bitter classmates openly accused her of acting as if she thought she was better than everyone else simply because her father happened to be a famous pop star, while others directed insults at her family. These cruel, formative experiences left a lasting emotional scar and heavily contributed to her firm decision to avoid discussing Andy publicly for many decades. What made the entire situation exceptionally heartbreaking and painful was the simple fact that Peta never once stopped yearning for a closer, more meaningful relationship with him. Behind the roaring headlines, the multi-platinum chart success, and the tabloid scandals, she was just a little girl who desperately wanted a real father to hug. She fondly recalled one specific phone conversation that gave her immense hope during a lonely time in her youth. During that heartfelt call, Andy warmly invited her to travel to America to visit him and even promised to introduce her personally to actor Michael J. Fox, who was one of the absolute biggest movie stars in the world at that moment. For a young, impressionable girl, the prospect sounded unimaginably exciting, magical, and unforgettable. Yet, despite the promise, that dream trip never materialized due to the chaotic nature of his life. As the years steadily passed, Andy's personal struggles continued to spiral dangerously out of control, pulling him further away from stability. While adoring fans still remembered the energetic young singer who had achieved extraordinary success in a remarkably short period, those closest to him were witnessing a tragic reality. His fierce battle with drug addiction had already severely damaged his once promising career, his personal relationships, and his fragile physical health. Soon, a series of devastating events would take an irreversible turn that would permanently alter Peta's life forever. For many grieving families, the sudden death of a loved one instantly becomes a painful moment frozen permanently in time, never to be forgotten. People can vividly remember exactly where they were standing, who they were speaking with, and what catastrophic event happened next. For Peta Weber, the dark night that Andy Gibb died would become one of those haunting memories that never faded away, no matter how many decades passed. By the late 1980s, Andy's tumultuous life had become increasingly unstable and fragile after years of personal turbulence. His early musical success had been historically extraordinary, making him a household name across the globe. He had proudly become the very first male solo artist in music history to score 3 consecutive #1 hit singles on the competitive Billboard Hot 100 chart. He had hosted major television programs, starred successfully on Broadway stages, and built a legendary career that countless aspiring performers could only dream about achieving. But according to close friends, heartbroken family members, and numerous media reports from that era, his long, exhausting struggle with substance abuse had finally taken a devastating, irreversible toll on his body. Andy had bravely entered professional rehabilitation centers more than once in desperate attempts to clean up his life, and was actively trying to rebuild his fractured career from the ground up. In fact, according to encouraging accounts shared by his supportive brothers Barry and Robin Gibb, Andy was surprisingly optimistic about his future during his final months on Earth. He had successfully returned to the recording studio environment and was working passionately on exciting new musical material, including promising songs such as Arrow Through the Heart and Man on Fire. Barry was even actively helping him secure a fresh, lucrative recording contract in Britain to relaunch his career properly. For a brief, hopeful moment in time, it genuinely appeared that Andy might finally be turning his tragic life around for good. Then, without warning, everything suddenly collapsed into utter darkness. In early March, Andy was staying in England preparing for what many loved ones hoped would be a triumphant artistic comeback. On the weekend of his milestone 30th birthday, he celebrated quietly with close friends while continuing his studio work. Just 2 short days later, he was rushed to John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford complaining of severe, alarming chest pains. Doctors at the medical facility initially believed that extensive tests were urgently needed to determine the exact underlying cause of his sudden physical distress. According to official reports from that dark time, Andy abruptly lost consciousness while under medical care and heartbreakingly never recovered his faculties. He passed away just a few days later on March 10, 1988, with the official cause of death determined to be myocarditis, a dangerous inflammation of the heart muscle tissue. Renowned cardiologist Dr. William Schell later explained to the public that years of heavy cocaine abuse had severely weakened his heart muscle over time, making his body far more vulnerable to such fatal conditions. While the stunned global public learned the heartbreaking news through morning newspapers and flashing television news broadcasts, the immediate impact inside Petta's family home in Australia was immediate, chaotic, and deafening. In her candid interview with News.com, Petta recalled that she had just proudly qualified for a major district swimming carnival and was excitedly preparing to compete. The very night before the big athletic event, she was trying to sleep when sudden panic erupted all around her house. Telephones were ringing constantly and frantically throughout the night without stopping for even a minute. Family members were running around in absolute panic, trying to comprehend the unfathomable reality. Her mother, grandparents, and extended relatives were desperately trying to process the agonizing news that Andy had officially passed away overseas. Petta vividly remembered that not a single person in the house managed to close their eyes or sleep that entire night. The family home was completely filled with suffocating confusion, overwhelming grief, and profound shock that froze everyone in their tracks. She was only 10 years old at the time, struggling immensely to comprehend what had truly happened to the father she barely knew. Unlike many fortunate children who learn about tragic life events gradually over time, she was suddenly thrown violently into the center of an intense international news story. The untimely death of Andy Gibb marked the tragic end of a short but remarkably influential musical career. But for his young daughter, it was merely the bitter beginning of an entirely different kind of personal struggle. While many outside observers assumed that the most difficult part of the ordeal was simply losing her father, Petta Weber has since explained that the grueling years following his death brought an entirely new set of monumental challenges. In the chaotic days immediately following Andy's passing, Petta and her grieving family had to prepare to travel thousands of miles from Australia to England for the funeral services. What should have been a quiet, deeply private moment of family mourning quickly morphed into an aggressive public spectacle covered by international media. Speaking openly to News.com, Petta recalled being strictly instructed by adults to keep her head down and hide her face whenever photographers or aggressive reporters approached them. Even as a child, she acutely understood that ruthless strangers were trying to exploit every single raw moment of the family's public grief for profit. The suffocating media attention was overwhelmingly terrifying. Andy's sudden death had instantly become a massive international news headline dominating front pages. Newspapers across Britain, Australia, and the United States were aggressively covering every single development surrounding the funeral arrangements. Hungry reporters desperately wanted sensational comments from grieving family members, while persistent photographers camped outside locations connected to the family. For a vulnerable 10-year-old girl who had never sought out public attention, the entire terrifying experience felt like a nightmare. Petta later remembered feeling intensely frightened as aggressive photographers followed her family closely through the bustling airport while they were trying to board a flight to England. The situation was exceptionally difficult to process because she was still emotionally trying to comprehend that her father was never coming back. While the adults surrounding her were frantically discussing complex funeral arrangements, heavy media coverage, and sensitive family matters, she was simply a little girl grieving the loss of her dad. Yet the invasive public attention left virtually zero room for personal privacy or healing. Unfortunately, the social problems and torment did not miraculously end after the funeral services concluded and the family returned home. According to Petta's heartbreaking testimony, the severe bullying she had already experienced at school before Andy's death became exponentially worse afterward. Suddenly, every single person at her school knew exact details of what had happened. Graphic news reports were plastered everywhere, making it impossible to escape. Classmates constantly discussed the tragic story in the hallways. Some cruel individuals treated her completely differently because they negatively associated her with the sensational headlines surrounding Andy's struggles with addiction and his tragic demise. Years later, an adult Peta emotionally described that dark period of her life as absolute torture. She explicitly stated that she would not wish that kind of relentless psychological pain on anyone, no matter who they were. What made the entire situation particularly agonizing was the fact that the intrusive public attention followed her around like a shadow long after the initial news cycle faded. Even as an adult trying hard to build an independent life and a respectable career on her own terms, she frequently found herself being introduced not as Peta Weber, but simply as Andy Gibb's daughter. She recalled meeting various people who immediately wanted to pry into her personal life to discuss her famous father and her legendary uncles, rather than taking the time to genuinely know her as a human being. In one specific example she shared publicly with listeners, she met the mother of a former romantic partner, and the conversation instantly devolved into an interrogation about Andy and the Bee Gees. Moments like that reinforced a bitter feeling she had carried inside her heart for most of her life, the painful realization that many people were far more fascinated by a famous surname than by the actual person standing right in front of them. Yet during a long, heartfelt conversation with her cousin Samantha, something completely unexpected happened that shifted her perspective. For the very first time in her life, she connected deeply with someone who truly understood what it was genuinely like to grow up carrying the heavy, invisible weight of the famous Gibb legacy. That lengthy conversation became a massive emotional breakthrough for her. Hedda suddenly realized with absolute clarity that she was not alone in her struggles. Other younger members of the extended family had experienced similar pressures, devastating losses, and complicated, conflicting emotions regarding their famous lineage. Instead of feeling like an isolated outsider looking in from the outside world, she began to feel like an embraced part of a family she had never fully known or understood before. One of the most meaningful, deeply personal decisions she made during the course of the project involved the specific song she chose to record. Rather than selecting one of the globally famous mega hits that Andy had created with the major support of his brothers, she specifically wanted to perform a song written solely by her father. She explained in interviews that this deliberate choice gave her a powerful, tangible connection to the man she lost. It was not merely intended as a tribute to a pop celebrity. It was a daughter searching desperately for a way to understand the father she never had enough time to truly know. Perhaps the most revealing and poignant statement Peta made during her public return was when she declared that Andy was an integral part of the overarching Gibb musical legacy, and that if anyone was going to represent him properly, it should naturally be his own flesh and blood. Those powerful words reflected a dramatic, beautiful shift from the frightened young girl who once wanted absolutely nothing to do with public discussions about her father. Today, more than 3 decades after the tragic death of Andy Gibb, Peta's incredible story offers a fresh, rare perspective that fans rarely get to hear in traditional media. It is not just the typical Hollywood story of chart records, sold-out concerts, or celebrity romances. Instead, it is the deeply human story of a daughter trying to make peace with a complicated, painful past. Through her involvement with the Gibb Collective, she finally found profound connections with cousins she barely knew, gained a much deeper understanding of her father's rightful place within the family tree, and discovered a healthy way to embrace that heavy history on her own terms. More than 3 decades after Andy Gibb's passing, his brave daughter has finally shared the personal story she kept locked away for most of her life. Her honest memories reveal a softer, truer side of Andy that fans rarely saw, not the chart-topping superstar dazzling a stadium, but the loving father she always wished she had known much better. The enduring musical journey of the Gibb family is a testament to extraordinary talent, but it is also a reminder of the heavy human cost of sudden fame. Long before Andy Gibb became a household name across America and Europe, his early life in Australia and Ibiza was shaped by a musically gifted family that recognized raw talent instantly. His older brothers, Barry, Robin, and Morris, were already carving out a path to international stardom, creating intricate vocal harmonies that would eventually redefine pop and disco music for generations. When Andy emerged as a solo artist in his late teens, the music industry was unprepared for the sheer magnetism he possessed. Producers and executives immediately saw a golden opportunity to capitalize on his boyish good looks and natural vocal delivery. Tracks like I Just Want to Be Your Everything skyrocketed to the top of the charts not just because of clever marketing, but because Andy possessed a genuine gift for melodic storytelling. Yet this rapid ascent to superstardom acted as a double-edged sword. While stadiums filled with screaming teenagers bought every record he released, the internal infrastructure of his personal life began to fracture under the immense weight of expectation, constant touring, and the toxic temptations that often accompanied the 1970s and 1980s music scene. For a young man barely out of his teens, navigating the labyrinth of Hollywood nightlife proved catastrophic. Surrounded by enablers, opportunistic acquaintances, and the relentless pressure to replicate his previous chart-topping success, Andy turned to substances as a coping mechanism for his mounting anxiety and loneliness. This invisible battle was entirely detached from the smiling, polished image projected on album covers and teen magazine posters. While millions of fans purchased his records to feel a sense of romantic connection, the people closest to him watched in mounting despair as his health deteriorated. His marriage to Kim Reeder, which began with high hopes and youthful optimism, could not survive the collateral damage of his escalating addictions. Petta's birth should have served as a powerful anchor to pull him back to reality, but the grip of substance abuse was too strong. The resulting separation and subsequent legal battles played out in the public eye, turning a private family heartache into tabloid entertainment. This environment of scrutiny created a hostile world for a growing child, forcing Petta to build emotional armor at an age when she should have been carefree. The psychological toll of growing up as the daughter of an absent and troubled superstar cannot be overstated. Children process absence and trauma in deeply internal ways, often blaming themselves for circumstances entirely outside their control. For Petta, the television screen became a bizarre, frustrating window into a world she could not touch or understand. Seeing her father performing hit songs on solid gold while her mother stood beside her in an ordinary Australian living room created a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. How could the man singing joyfully to millions be the exact same person who missed birthdays, phone calls, and milestones? This disconnect fostered a deep sense of alienation that followed her to school, where her peers offered no shelter from the harsh realities of tabloid culture. The bullying she endured was a cruel reminder that her father's fame was a public commodity, open for critique and mockery by children who understood nothing of addiction or grief. These formative years forged a protective instinct within Petta, leading her to hide her lineage as a shield against further emotional pain. When the news of Andy's death reached Australia in March 1988, it shattered any lingering childhood fantasies of a joyful family reunion in the future. The shock waves of his passing were felt globally, but within Petta's household the tragedy was immediate, loud, and utterly chaotic. At just 10 years old, a child is unequipped to handle the sudden loss of a parent, let alone a parent whose face is plastered across international television screens and front-page newspapers. The media circus that followed their travel to England for the funeral robbed the family of a quiet, dignified grieving process. Photographers jostled for position, treating human sorrow as a commercial asset. Petta's instruction to keep her head down became a metaphor for her entire early life, a desperate attempt to shield herself from a world that wanted to consume her family's tragedy. Instead of finding closure after the funeral, she returned to a school environment where the whispers and taunts intensified, turning her daily existence into an endurance test. The legacy of her father felt less like a musical heritage, and more like a heavy anchor dragging her down into unwanted notoriety. Despite these immense trials, Petta's story is ultimately one of quiet resilience and eventual reconciliation with her past. For decades, her instinctual self-preservation method was total silence. She understood better than anyone that speaking to journalists often led to sensationalized headlines that distorted her reality for public consumption. By politely declining interview requests, ignoring documentary offers, and stepping away from the spotlight, she reclaimed ownership of her narrative. She chose to focus on building a stable, authentic life on her own terms, valuing genuine personal connections over the superficial allure of celebrity culture. This fierce independence allowed her to heal slowly, away from the prying eyes of gossip columnists and pop culture historians who viewed her father merely as a tragic statistic of the 1980s music scene rather than a complex human being who loved his family despite his flaws. The turning point represented by the Gibb Collective project demonstrated a profound evolution in Petta's relationship with her family history. Reaching out across generations, her cousin Samantha extended an olive branch that bridged a decades-long emotional gap. Joining forces with the other children of the legendary Bee Gees siblings was initially daunting, requiring Petta to step outside her comfort zone and confront the very surname she had spent her life downplaying. Yet through open and honest dialogue, she discovered a shared empathy among her cousins who had also navigated the unique complexities of growing up under the shadow of incredible musical greatness. This sense of belonging transformed her perspective, turning an intimidating public tribute into a deeply personal journey of healing and closure. Selecting a song written solely by her father allowed her to bypass the commercial gloss of his biggest hits and connect with him on an intimate, artistic level. It was a daughter's quiet homage to a man she never truly got to know, symbolizing forgiveness, understanding, and acceptance. Reflecting on Andy Gibb's life today reveals a tragic paradox that continues to captivate music enthusiasts and researchers alike. He possessed an undeniable, lightning-in-a-bottle star quality that propelled him to the pinnacle of pop music history before he had even reached his mid-20s. His vocal tone, emotional delivery, and striking stage presence made him an icon of the late 1970s golden age of pop and disco. Yet, the very machinery that manufactured his success also accelerated his personal downfall, leaving behind a trail of broken relationships and unfulfilled potential. The music industry of that era was notoriously ill-equipped to handle the mental health struggles and addiction battles of its brightest stars, often treating human beings as disposable commodities. Andy's story is a sobering reminder of the fragility behind the glitz and glamour, illustrating how rapidly extreme success can turn into personal isolation without a strong, supportive foundation. For Peta Weber, coming to terms with this complex legacy required immense courage and time. Her journey teaches us that behind every historical pop culture tragedy lies a human family left behind to pick up the broken pieces. While millions of fans remember Andy through the timeless melodies of Shadow Dancing or Love is Thicker Than Water, Peta's memories are anchored in a very different reality, one of missed phone calls, unfulfilled promises, and the quiet ache of a child longing for her father. By finally sharing her perspective through select collaborative projects and rare interviews, she has provided a vital missing puzzle piece to the overarching narrative of the Gibb family. She has ensured that Andy is remembered not just as a poster boy of 1970s pop stardom, but as a real person who left an indelible, complicated mark on the hearts of those who loved him most. The broader cultural fascination with the Bee Gees and Andy Gibb shows no signs of fading, as new generations of fans continue to discover their timeless catalog of music through streaming platforms and documentaries. Yet, true appreciation of musical history requires looking beyond the glossy surface to understand the intricate human stories that shaped these iconic tracks. Andy's brief time on Earth left an enduring imprint on the global soundscape, inspiring countless pop artists who followed in his footsteps. His ability to convey deep vulnerability through upbeat pop arrangements remains a masterclass in vocal performance. But as Peta's testimony powerfully illustrates, the true measure of a person's life is found not in the number of Billboard #1 singles they accumulate, but in the personal connections they forge and the love they leave behind in the hearts of their children. As we look back at the phenomenal rise and tragic fall of Andy Gibb from the vantage point of modern times, his daughter's voice offers a grounding, essential counterweight to the sensationalism of tabloid journalism. Peta's refusal to be defined solely by her father's fame, coupled with her eventual willingness to embrace her musical heritage on her own terms, highlights a remarkable inner strength. She successfully navigated the minefield of public scrutiny, teenage bullying, and profound grief to build a meaningful, grounded life in Australia. Her story serves as an inspiring reminder that healing is rarely a linear process, and that finding peace often requires confronting the most painful chapters of our past with honesty, grace, and resilience. Ultimately, the enduring legacy of Andy Gibb is a multi-layered tapestry woven from extraordinary artistic triumph, heartbreaking personal struggles, and enduring familial love. While his career was cut tragically short on his 30th birthday, the music he created continues to bring joy to millions of listeners worldwide, preserving his spirit across generations. At the same time, his daughter's courageous decision to break her lifelong silence ensures that his human story remains intact. Shielded from Hollywood myths and sensationalized revisionism, Peta Weber has successfully bridged the massive gap between the global pop superstar the world adored and the imperfect, loving father she desperately wished to know better. Through her art, her memories, and her quiet strength, she has honored his memory in the most authentic way possible, turning a lifetime of sorrow into a lasting testament of familial reconciliation and enduring grace.